I just have a quick programming note. We'll be chatting in half an hour with Steve Millington from the Twin Falls County Republican Party. He's been doing some tracking of legislation in Boise, and he'll share some of that with us during his weekly appearance. That's on the way in a short while. In the meantime, I've got a couple of things I hope to get to before he actually shows up today and get these out of the way, and then we can delve into some of that other material that he's talking about. Yesterday afternoon, I got a quick bulletin on my cell phone from The Hill, which is a newspaper out of Washington, that Republicans had come up with a replacement plan for Obamacare. So I started looking through the headlines and checking out various other stories that were popping up about all of this, and all I can conclude is that we're exchanging Obamacare for Ryan Care. Now, what do I mean by that? Instead of calling it the well, we call it Obamacare, and even President Obama used to chuckle about that, but the real name was Affordable Care Act, ACA for short. So we're going to be scrapping that. And instead, we're going to have the Affordable Health Act, which is the AHA. And this is the major difference. This is called semantics. It's saying to yourself, all right, I just bought myself a new couch. But your grandmother insists you bought yourself a Davenport. Even though it's the same object, you have a disagreement about what you should call it. And that's essentially what we've done. This is to appease media and not necessarily the constituents who are demanding some changes. Because apparently Republicans in Washington are still more fearful of a few editorials from the propaganda wing of the Democrat Party than constituents. I've got a couple of clippings on this today I wanted to share with you. This comes from Eric Erickson at The Resurgent, which is his new website, and struggling, I should point out as well, because Erickson was the leader of the Never Trump movement in the Republican Party. Did not help him when he was launching a new website, albeit since then he's backed off a bit, and he's actually praised Trump from time to time when he thinks it's necessary and believes that Trump has actually done something well, which is good to note. He's writing, though, about the change in the healthcare status. He said the biggest winner this week is Barack Obama, whose signature legacy is going to remain largely untouched by Republicans who are going so far as to keep the individual mandate. Of course, they will not call it that, but individuals will get a 30% penalty, that is a fine, if they do not keep insurance. That is the individual mandate in all but name. In fact, this is actually of questionable constitutionality because the government-imposed fine would be paid to the insured person's previous insurance company when they subsequently try to buy a new policy. I also was looking through some of this, and the president had said during his State of the Union address last week that they would be offering tax credits to people who couldn't afford the new health care plan. All right, so what's a tax credit? We did have subsidies for people. We were giving them subsidies if they couldn't afford it. In other words, the government was taking money out of the big treasure chest in Washington, which it collects from taxpayers, people like you, working people across the country, and it was turning around and handing it to other people who couldn't afford in the form of a subsidy. In other words, paying for their insurance for them, paying their freight for them. And that was objectionable to many taxpayers out there who felt, well, I'm already struggling and I'm not getting this freebie. So now we have, instead of a subsidy, you've got a tax credit. Well, what's a tax credit? Well, for those people out there who don't have enough money to pay for Ryan Care, naming it after Paul Ryan, you don't have enough money to pay for Ryan Care, the government is going to give you a tax credit. And this morning, as I was driving into work, I heard it was going to come in a form of a quarterly payment. So every 3 months, those of you who can't afford health insurance will be getting a check directly from the government, and that's your tax credit. That will be going to people who mainly they don't make enough money to pay taxes. So in other words, instead of calling it a subsidy, we're calling it a tax credit, but it still comes out of the great big treasure chest in Washington that the taxpayers have filled. And government, at no point is government going to step in and cut spending in order to give you a break while they give that tax credit to someone else. That's how that works. This is what I mean by the semantics, the sleight of hand, the shell game that's going on. calling something one thing and then providing the same thing that you provided them before. This morning, there is a great post at Washington Examiner. An editorialist there says, if we don't replace Obamacare, we're going to be headed for a single-payer healthcare system, which echoes what a newspaper columnist who's got the exact same name as this radio host wrote last Tuesday morning in the Times News, saying that this was all a setup to drive us into a single-payer system that we simply can't afford. And we have what we call entitlements in this country. Speaking of using language to try and paint something as it really isn't, what does entitlement mean? It means you're somehow entitled to it, as if you have a right to it. So we have what are called now welfare payments, which we used to call welfare payments. They're called entitlements. And even Republicans use that phrase or that word, entitlements. In other words, you're entitled to food stamps. You're entitled to free health care. You're entitled to a welfare check. None of these things ever mentioned in the Constitution by the founders. So now welfare is an entitlement, and even Republicans use that word, and it subliminally impacts what we believe and what we believe we're entitled to when somebody says it's your entitlement. So here we go all over again. And this writer says, it's important that legislators understand the stakes. If they fail to repeal Obamacare now, the law's continued death spiral, and those words come from the chief executive officer of Aetna, which is a big insurance company, and the public's dissatisfaction with the law will keep us on a path toward a single-payer system that would offer all Americans only one form of insurance, one completely controlled and financed by the government. The only way, and it's still not going to be affordable. The Daily Signal, which is the Daily Signal is the media arm of the Heritage Foundation, did some research into this a few weeks ago. There are 7 different forms of national healthcare systems. Some are hybrids, some are single-payer. Single-payer is what we have, I believe, you have something like that in Canada. The ultimate is in Britain. Britain, the government controls everything. Doctors and nurses become wards of the state. In other words, the government tells them what they're going to make. All right, you spent 10 years getting your medical degree and you're hundreds of thousands of dollars in debt, maybe more, but the government's going to tell you you can only make this much. You can only charge this much for this procedure. The government also puts you on a waiting list. There was the horror story a few years ago of a woman in Britain who was diagnosed with breast cancer, and somebody said, well, we got to take care of this really soon, so we're going to put your name on the list and we'll see you in 8 months. She said, I'll be dead by then. Well, that is possible. That's a possibility. You may die before we actually get to do the surgery and remove the cancer. I had a friend who told me the story about his mother. She was 93 years old. She went into a nursing home in London, and somebody realized after 3 days that the staff forgot to feed and water her. Now, she survived for a while after that, but it was touch and go for a long time. And what they'll do is they'll come along and they'll say, okay, we're going to set what doctors can charge. We're going to set what hospitals can charge. And yes, they may have to buy all of this very expensive equipment, but they'll have to eat that cost. And then we're going to tell the patients, in order to help the doctors and the hospitals out, the healthcare providers, that we're going to have to ration your care and limit what you actually get. That doesn't necessarily mean we're going to be able to pay for it, but they're going to try to control the costs through that system. That's what we're headed for. It's 8:15. Bill Colley with you on Top Story this morning on News Radio 1310, KLIX, and newsradio1310.com. I brought this up the other day, and I think it's still available if you do. Nothing goes away on the internet. Once it's there, it seems to always be there. There's a video that was done in the early days of YouTube, so it's nearly a decade old, and then member of the House of Representatives, Dr. Ron Paul, did a video of about 7 minutes in length. He's standing outside the Capitol building, and he recommends we go back to indemnity plans, which is what Mom and Dad had in the 1960s and prior. And insurance is essentially to cover you from any catastrophic loss. But every time you have the sniffles, this is akin what we've got now, what we've got with this expectation, entitlement, if you will, that it's somehow you're right. What we now have is this view that if you get the sniffles, you should have somebody else pay for it. Well, you think someone else is paying for it. You don't see what's going out in the way of taxes or in your because your insurance at work, right? You just see a figure there that's deducted every month, and that's not in your paycheck, but it's like every other deduction that comes out of there, drip, drip. If you had to pay this money all out at the end of the year, ooh, there would be a rebellion in this country when people actually saw what they were being charged, which is why you have withholdings for taxes, for health insurance. All of these things are done on the sly that way because psychologically it has a different impact on you when you go through all of this. But this is the point he was trying to make, is that what's similar to if you used your car insurance the same way you use your health insurance, then your car insurance company would pay for your oil changes. Well, it doesn't. It doesn't for a reason, because that's something you're expected to do on your own. It's regular maintenance. So if you get a cold, you pay the fee at your doctor's office, and you pay for the aspirin or whatever else you need during the course of that, which is what we used to do 40, 50 years ago. But we don't do it any longer because, well, there's an entitlement now. That's why that doesn't happen. Bill Colley with you on Top Story on News Radio 1310, KLIX, and NewsRadio1310.com. This situation is not going to get any better. I referenced in my column last week. In 1990 or 91, I have an old photograph. I still had a full head of dark hair at the time, and big old 1980-style glasses, and I'm sitting in a lounge at the Shine Student Center at Syracuse University, and I'm interviewing Rena Schweitzer Miller. She was the daughter of Dr. Albert Schweitzer. He'd been dead for 25 years at that point. And I'm interviewing her 25 years ago or more, so now it's been over 50 years since he made the prediction. But before he died in the mid-60s, he said that because of our desire that we all thought we would live forever or wanted to live forever, that we would come up with all of these ingenious ways to prolong life and all of this great equipment. But his warning was we wouldn't know how to pay for it. That was his prediction. Then he died in 1965, and everyone said, yeah, right, old man. Ha, 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 ha. And here we are today in this situation. On the other hand, the option is bankruptcy, and maybe a lot of people think that that's okay, too. Just a quick note before we take a short break. We have a break coming up in just a moment, and we're at 30. Yeah, 30. I still have a 0 on the end of that. I wanted to mention my friends at Western Visions, Inc. Got to tour some of the work that Western Visions is doing in Cassia County a few weeks ago. And they do things along the lines of historic renovation and structural revival. They use the latest in materials, layouts, electrical, lighting, and design elements. Western Visions provides the client with an experience that reflects their lifestyle preferences and personal sense of style. And I should point out, when I was looking at the building they're renovating, it's a very old historic building. It's going to be used as a private lodge. I mean, I'm talking high-end work here. This is something that I think you all should take a look at if you'd like something impressive like that. If you have friends, relatives, people who come to Idaho to visit on a regular basis, just because they love the lifestyle here, Western Visions, Inc. is the company that you need to contact. And if you'd like to know more, go to the website. The address is western-visions.com. That's western-visions.com. We've got more on the way. Bill Colley with you on Top Story. We're going to talk a little bit this morning, too, about the latest potential scandal engulfing Washington and the way the Democrats and media allies are trying to say, no, Barack Obama would never do that. I got up this morning and I looked outside and I thought, no, not again.
I thought the same thing.
Steve Millington.
You try.
Steve and I both had to brush vehicles off this morning. It snowed a little bit yesterday afternoon, and I thought this isn't going to last because, you look at it and you say to yourself, all right, there was a little snow in the forecast, and you walk outside in the morning and you got 2 inches of snow to brush off. So winter's not over, and that means, I stopped by Ramsey Heating and Electric the other day myself, but they were closed. People are allowed to take a day off now and then, but I know where the location is now, and if I have an issue when it comes to heating my home, I can drive out there and directly walk in the front door and say, please help me, because I don't know how to do it myself. Ramsey Heating and Electric will come out and get the job done right and get it done right the first time. I wanted to point out they provide problem-free, cozy winters. Summers, too. Hopefully we'll be able to talk about that coming up soon. Ramsey Heating and Electric is located at 2600 Overland Avenue in Burley. You can call them at 678-0459. That's 678-0459. Ramsey Heating and Electric, where they sell warm winters and cool summers. I wanted to mention something very because I'm going to get to it probably in the next hour of the program, but the latest potential scandal brewing in Washington, it's not going to go away anytime soon. But I was criticized. This was even after I replied to the fellow uh, by a Republican from out in the Minnecasia region a few weeks ago in the newspaper. He said I was apparently lazy and not well prepared for what I do. And I'm holding a stack of paperwork here. My preparation for today's show is about like it is every day. That would be about the size. Well, I don't know that they have many phone books anymore. I got one the other day delivered to the door, and but this is about the size probably of what you'd find in the Boise Nampa area. This stack of material I have, and I don't have little Keebler elves that do this for me. I have to do it all on myself. But in response to him, I have this because apparently I don't do my research. This is a quote from March 5th, 1978. So 39 years ago this week, from Robert Bork. I had a friend of mine who worked for Robert Bork at the Justice Department. Bork said, when an attorney general must decide for himself without shield of warrant whether to authorize surveillance and must accept the consequences if things go wrong, there is likely to be more care taken. The statute, however, has the effect of immunizing everyone, and sooner or later that fact will be taken advantage of. What was he talking about? He was talking about the FISA court, which may have been intercepting the transmissions, the communications out of Trump Tower in the weeks before the election. But being that I'm lazy and I just make wild-eyed accusations, my little Keebler elves actually went and dug that up for me from 39 years ago this week. So I just thought I'd pass that along. Steve Millington is in the studio. You're not one of my critics.
Do you want me to be?
But you see what I do
Yep.
here every week.
And I'm looking at his pile of stuff there, and it's got to be an inch thick. And he sends me an email at 5 o'clock in the morning, and I start going through my list, and mine's got to be probably a quarter of an inch thick of stuff that I printed off. Oh, we could be here till noon today just to get through the information we've got gathered up for a 10-minute show this morning.
You know, one of the things I sent you this morning, we've been hearing a lot about this demographics is destiny,
Yeah.
that the Democrats will eventually, just because of the changes in the population and the makeup of the population, and this theory's been around for about 15 years, but ever since the election, you've had people backing away from that, and the latest one comes from a writer at Slate who says this whole notion, and he points out among young people, that it was said that they were more liberal, but as it turns out, it was 30% called themselves liberal, 28 conservative, statistically a tie.
Yeah. Did
40% said they were in the middle, and they're expected to grow more conservative.
Well, and people have a tendency to become a little bit more conservative in their ideologies as they age. And so, as I read this article this morning, I did read it, by the way, at 5 o'clock
It's
this
got
morning.
charts and everything
Yeah,
else to
charts
back
and everything
it up.
else. And the thing that struck me was that the the bottom end of this demographic review was at 18 to 25, and they even at that demographic that was the 30-30, well, 30 to 28, almost a dead heat there, within the statistical error, whatever they call that thing. But by the time you got into the 50 plus category, they had moved more solidly to the conservative approach in their life. And guess what? These 18 to 25-year-olds, they're not going to get any younger, and they're not going to stay 18 to 25. In a little while, they're going to be 35 to 40, and that's when they have their ideological standards are going to begin to move more to the right side of the road. So as I read this thing, I thought to myself, I think there's a lot more at risk here for the Democrats than they think. Now, given that, here's the caveat. I don't think the Republicans, and I'm a little bit fired up this morning over this new old health care. It just drives me nuts. Maybe we can talk about, maybe not too. But I thought to myself, yes, the Republicans do have an advantage because people tend to become a little more conservative as they grow older. But that doesn't give the Democrats, I mean, the Republicans, excuse me, you can tell I'm fired up this morning. It does not give the Republicans any license to be stupid. And I said this the night of the elections, and I continue to maintain it. The Republicans have got 2 years to prove up on their campaign rhetoric. And if they do not, the voters will throw them all out and go back to something else. So we got 2 years to get it right. And I don't mean squirrel around and Mickey Mouse it. I mean, we got to get it right. I know we're coming up on a hard break, but I'll tell you what's wrong with the Washington, D.C. And it's a real good thing that they are not contractors building a house. And I'll just make a little comparison, analogy, if you will, to building a house and the way the Congress gets laws passed.
We'll get to that in just a moment, and just want to point out Steve Millington is in studio with us through 9 o'clock this morning. We're at 8:30. It's 31. Also tomorrow, Dr. Jonathan Tripp joining us in studio. He's going to be taking your telephone calls. Instead of picking a topic that we'll discuss, we're actually asking you, just you're going to get some advice from the doctor tomorrow. Whatever ails you, give us a call between 8:30 and 9 o'clock tomorrow morning here on the program for Better Health with Tripp Family Medicine. Doctor is still looking for new patients and, in fact, can often see you on the very same day if you call up in the morning with something ailing you. We do want to point out we do it every Wednesday, and his office is located on Fillmore Street, directly across from the main post office right here in Twin Falls, Idaho. This is Top Story on News Radio 1310, KLIX, and NewsRadio1310.com.